Welcome back, everyone. This is Eddie Muller. I'm with Ann Hockens, Director of Communications for the Film Noir Foundation. We are doing, I've lost track of how many of these we've done now, Ann, but we are doing another installment of Ask Eddie, which is quickly turning into Ask Eddie and Ann, because I very much appreciate the fact that so many people submit questions. I don't really review them all that closely, but when they come in to Ask Eddie at filmnoirfoundation.org, I sometimes quickly peruse them, and I love the fact that so many of them now are addressed to both of us, yeah. which I think is really great. So I'm ready to roll. How about you, Ann?
I'm ready too. So let's go for it.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. This first one's from Kathleen. We miss Noir City very badly. Have you thought about doing Noir City and drive-in movie theaters? The regular venue for Noir City here in Chicago is doing regular screenings at a local drive-in.
That took me back. Kathleen, that is of course my wife's name, so I thought, did my wife submit a question?
Not unless you moved to Chicago.
Okay. We've thought about it, of course. I don't know. I haven't actually gone to one of these I've been to drive-ins in the past, of course, in my youth. But I've gotten kind of mixed reports from people out here who have gone and done the drive-in thing. I think it's terrific. We're actually exploring doing festivals online as opposed to the drive-in thing. I just think there's more value in putting it online and streaming films, because I don't think the drive-in experience would adequately compensate for what we would be losing from our usual Noir City experience, which is that tremendous communal vibe that we have in the movie theaters. And of course, I wouldn't be there, yeah. And not that I'm the whole show, but I mean, when we do the traveling roadshow Noir Cities, it's a great thing to be able to interact with people who are, supporters of the Film Noir Foundation or potential supporters of the Film Noir Foundation. But at a drive-in thing, it would just be me recorded, or somebody else other than me, perhaps introducing the movies, and I don't know about that. I will say this. This isn't the question that was asked, but I'm going to say this. Right now, we are developing an online festival for what would be Noir City, DC, in conjunction with our colleagues at the AFI Silver Theater in Silver Spring, Maryland. They have been successfully doing film festivals online for a couple of months. And so we're putting our heads together with Todd Hitchcock, the programmer there, and I are planning on doing a continuation. I got my earpiece in here that keeps wanting to pop out. We're doing a continuation of the International Festival from 2020, and putting it online. And we'll see how that goes. I mean, there are obvious disadvantages, as it's not as personal and as intimate as the live festivals. The positives are I can do Q&As, and we can have more guests from all around the world, because it'll be an international festival. And so we could actually just do what we're doing right now with people in other countries and make that part of the festival, which is really great. And like, time zones don't really matter. The expense of traveling doesn't matter. So that's something we are doing right now. So everybody can look forward to that.
Yeah, it's so funny when you said continuation of the International Festival, because for a moment it took me a while to remember it. Like, it feels like it was so long ago. And I realized that was just like the beginning of this year,
It was 8 months. It was 8 months ago.
It feels like much longer.
I agree.
Yeah. So this one is from Alex in Portugal. And he's talking about the swaths of American culture contained within the Fox archive sold to Disney last year. From a cultural standpoint, should any corporate entity be allowed such an important part of a country's heritage? Is there anybody that would have the clout to step in if such a large library was ever put to the market once again?
Is this Alex? Is Alex's name Alex Portugal, or is this Alex in Portugal?
Alex in Portugal.
Okay, Alex in Portugal. Okay, that's interesting, because this is a question that is different for people overseas than if they're in the States. So anyway, it's an interesting question. And so what Alex is saying, obviously a lot of people have heard that Disney has bought 20th Century Fox, and that a lot has been said about their closing the film vault. That is not a done deal. And all of this is being sorted out right now. So, and there are, it affects films in different ways. The access that repertory cinemas would have to the vault is likely very different than the access that something like Turner Classic Movies may have to the vault. And I know for a fact that, yes, a lot of cinemas are at present being denied access to older Fox films. That's not to say that they won't have access eventually. And TCM is working on a deal right now to be able to work out what are the terms going forward of showing Fox films on Turner Classic Movies. So as I'm building my calendar for Noir Alley next year, we have left blank spots in the anticipation of Fox films being able to go in those blank spots. So that's a good thing. On a grander scale, and I apologize that I keep pushing my finger in my ear, but this thing just wants to keep popping out, and anyway. On a grander scale, what Alex is asking about is really interesting. And when he says it probably isn't this way in America, what he's referring to is ownership of intellectual property, right?
Right.
And yeah, in America, it's owned by somebody. And invariably, it's owned by a corporation that I don't think I'm being, out of bounds to say that in many cases, the people who have the responsibility for that ownership may not cherish it in the same way that other people do.
Yeah.
It's just an asset. And if it stops being a financially lucrative asset, then they don't really know what to do with it, and they don't care about it very much. That's the way it is in this country. I think that I and other people I know would love to see a national film archive.
Yeah.
That is not the same thing necessarily as the Library of Congress. It could be, but I kind of hear what Alex is proposing here is, what if there was a repository for all the stuff that's created in this country, which is a lot.
Yeah.
What if when, like when I write a book, a copy of that book goes to the Library of Congress and is just kept there. It's part of American history, right? That's not true of every film that's made. Yeah. Right? They establish a copyright, but do they physically put the film in inventory? Not really, no. So, and when you see those things where the Library of Congress says, well, we've added these films to the National Film Registry, that's kind of pie in the sky. It doesn't necessarily mean that those films are being preserved at the Library of Congress because they've been added to the National Film Registry. Those films still have owners that must do that themselves, right? It would be wonderful if there was a National Film Registry, and every time somebody made a film, a copy went on deposit there, and there were terms that kind of coincided with the copyright terms of the film, that like, if this film, the copyright is not renewed on the film, then it becomes a public domain film at a certain point. But this is very, very difficult to work out for the same reasons that we see politically in this country, because who pays for that?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the question. You know, you propose something like that, and a lot of people are going to say that's socialism. You know, why should our tax dollars go to preserving films that we're never going to watch? You know, that's socialism. They do it in France, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously don't do it in other countries, because there are countries much worse off than America when it comes to film preservation. So, you know, it's an uphill climb, but I'm not going to say that it's an absolute impossibility. I mean, it's conceivable that that may eventually happen one day. When we start losing big chunks of our cinema history, I think you'll see people rally around this issue more. Something for further discussion as well. So that's what I have to say about it right now. But yeah, we can move on, because we'll be revisiting this issue regularly.
Yeah, unfortunately or fortunately. Nell from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Apologies if this is an asinine question, but how is the path to restoration different when the film is in the public domain?
Kind of ties into the last question. It's, in some ways, it's okay. When the film is in the public domain, it makes it harder for us to do a restoration, because it's harder to find good original elements to preserve. Because if it's in the public domain, that generally means that it has lost stewardship. Nobody is really taking care of it. And most of the people, I mean, people know who have bought over the years, they've bought DVDs and things that are public domain movies, and they never look very good, because the people who have accessed the elements are just, they're not interested in restoring them. They're interested in exploiting them and getting the most out of them that they can. That's why we have very often preserved public domain films like Too Late for Tears and Woman on the Run and The Man Who Cheated Himself. These were movies that were in the public domain but did not have restored versions of them. So we look for public domain movies to restore. Obviously, the flip side of that is, if it's not in the public domain, it is owned by a studio or someone, and they may not care about restoring the film because they don't feel they're going to make sufficient money from it. So that's the difference. I mean, that question, it just comes down to that. Again, it's a question of ownership. And I will say this so people understand. The Film Noir Foundation, we don't own the movies that we restore. Even if they're public domain. It has never been part of our mission to own these movies, because I don't feel that's our role. So far, we have partnered with the University of California, Los Angeles, because of the Film and Television Archive. And in most cases, the films actually are owned by the University of California Board of Regents, right? Yeah. I don't think there's a single person on the Board of Regents who knows that they own these movies. But that's because I don't really know what's going to happen to the Film Noir Foundation, right? As of now, the Film Noir Foundation is a loyal cadre of people, present company included, right? Who make this happen. But at some point, if I die, when I die, when all this happens, we'll have put something in place to indicate to the University of California what our desire is for these films that are in the collection at the Film Archive. but they are owned by a much larger institution that has the wherewithal to properly care for these movies. We can't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, we just raise the money to restore them. We do not pay to maintain them or to house them or any of that stuff, because that's not our mission, right? And I'm not a big ownership believer, right? It's just like, I'm happy to restore the films. I'm happy to get the films back in circulation. It is unnecessary to claim ownership of the films. That's kind of not the way my brain works. So I set up a situation in which the films will survive in perpetuity without questions of ownership.
Okay, and also it'd be incredibly costly to house the films ourselves, by the way. Just so people
You better believe
know that
yeah.
part of it is it's extremely
Yep.
expensive. And this is from Joseph Ferguson. Let us know when your updated book of reviews will be available for purchase. Do you know?
I trust he's referring to Dark City, the lost
Yes.
world of film noir. It's not really a book of reviews, but I am thrilled to say that the manuscript has been submitted and approved, and it was interesting going. It's a little different now that it's 22 years later and I'm established as an authority, as opposed to having written that book when I had a lot of gall writing that book, 22 years ago in the style that it was written. But I'm very, very excited about it. It'll be coming out in spring of 2021, and so far I just couldn't be happier. It looks fabulous. I've seen the new cover. It'll be a hardcover with a dust jacket, and it has 3 completely new chapters, and every chapter has been revised and expanded, and I couldn't be happier. It's great.
And this is from Jeffrey. What are your thoughts on releasing an audio book companion for Dark City Dames with recordings of the interviews?
That's a really cool idea, and I'd have to see how that could work. I mean, I recorded those interviews with the actresses on little mini cassette recorders because it was a while ago. There were no iPhones. I could have, if iPhones were around then, I would have recorded the whole thing on iPhones, and I probably could have shot video interviews as easily as anything else. But they're just the audio quality was all I was thinking about, was getting it recorded so that I had it as reference. It was not to be produced as anything. But I've heard some pretty cool things. I don't know if you saw this documentary on Johnny Cash that Tom Zimney did, where it's a documentary film, and there's a lot of footage and everything, but it really didn't happen until they came across this journalist who interviewed Johnny Cash, and he had all these old cassette tape interviews with him. And access to those became the basis of the whole documentary, because and the fact that the sound quality wasn't good didn't hurt the production at all. It actually made it more ethereal. It was like hearing Johnny Cash from beyond the grave, and it was pretty awesome. And I have to say, when I heard that and saw Tom's movie, I said, I could do something like this with the Dark City Dames tapes. So, Jeff, that was a really good question, and it may happen. We'll see.
And this is from Francesca in Seattle. The other day I said, film noir is the only truly American film genre. Then I said, I'd better ask Eddie to make sure. Is it true, or was I getting mixed up with jazz? America's one true original.
That's pretty funny. Jazz and burlesque. Well, I know where you're going with this, Francesca, but I'm going to have to say, I don't think so, because I find Westerns to be far more an American film genre than film noir. I mean, I've seen a lot of film noir in France and England and Germany and Argentina and Japan and Spain. I haven't seen that many Westerns. I mean, Italy, of course, but they're specifically copying American movies, right?
Yeah.
But the Western is the truly indigenous American genre. You know, you just don't see Westerns in other countries, but you do see film noir. So I'm going to say it's jazz, burlesque, and Westerns are specifically American. But I will say, when people think that, what they're thinking is the language of noir. They're hearing it. They're hearing that American vernacular speech, and that's why they're saying this is a specifically American thing. That's why, you know, when you watch a French film noir, it can look like film noir, but it just doesn't feel the same, because, you know, we don't understand the wisecracks and the banter and all that stuff in a French film, like the French may. If they, you know, I've seen a ton of French film noir, and I can't really tell you if language-wise that's a big part of French film noir, because I just don't speak the language fluently enough to understand the slang and all that kind of stuff, you know. So obviously it's there. Rififi and touche pas, Grisby, these are all French slang, you know.
Right.
But anyway, that's my answer. I'd go with Westerns first.
Yeah, and I think too, with the thing about French slang is kind of interesting because so Ted, who is our webmaster for the Film Noir Foundation, is really fluent in French. And when we watch something French, sometimes he'll lean over to me and say, well, that's not really a good translation of what they're saying. And he gives me a much more like slangy equivalent of what they're saying, because they're not really subtitled that way. So when you're kind of doing it just through subtitles, you're right, you lose that sort of feeling for it, you know?
Well, you know, I have to say, Anne, it's very interesting how it's very unequal in comprehension of this stuff, because a lot, you know, it's a lot to get people in this country to watch subtitled movies or, you know, just foreign films at all. But when I did my film noir series in Paris at the Cinémathèque Française, I was showing the film Red Light with George Raft, and the subtitling thing broke.
Yeah.
Right? So there was no French subtitles, and the director of the Cinémathèque came out and said, you know, we'll vote. Do people want to take a rain check, or do they want to continue with the film only in English? 80% of the audience stayed and just listened to it in English. You know, now, whether they were fluent, whether they understood everything that was going on, or whether they didn't need to because they were just riding the, you know, that's a beautiful looking film. I mean, it's visually really stunning. But they got it. You know, I sat there and watched it, and I was fascinated that they laughed in the places I would expect them to laugh. And, you know, that if in this country, if the subtitles went off and it's like you're stuck, it's all in French, you think 80% of the audience is going to stay? No way. No way.
This is from Marty. Do you think that the World War II restrictions on the film industry had a major impact on movies, film noir especially?
That's an interesting question. It certainly had, and if people don't know what Marty is referring to, during wartime there were definite restrictions on the film budgets and on how much you could spend on sets. I think $5,000 at one point was like, you can't build any set for a movie that cost more than $5,000. That was it, right? Which is still a lot of money in, you know, early 40s. I think it's a bit of a stretch to think that this had something to do with the development of film noir, which I think was inevitable regardless of the budgetary stuff. But I do think it was a factor in the executive offices where they were deciding which films to greenlight.
Right.
Once these films proved popular, 1944 was the crucial year, right? So the war didn't have that much longer to go after 1944, but that was Laura, Double Indemnity, Phantom Lady, Woman in the Window, Murder My Sweet. All those were hits in 1944, and that's when they said, hey, you know, the great thing about these movies is they're not really costly. And since we're not spending a lot of money anyway, why not make more of these? They seem to be economically feasible. So that certainly was a factor. That, you know, but whether that had earlier than that, I don't really know if that was much of a factor. When you look at stuff like I Wake Up Screaming and This Gun for Hire and things like that, you know, there was money being spent in the production of those movies, and they were made, well, I Wake Up Screaming was right as we went to war, and This Gun for Hire was, we were in the war effort had started. So anyway, it's a good question and something to think about, but I think it was inevitable regardless.
And this one is from Steve. One of the most identifiable and wonderful visual elements in classic noir is the main title, but I found little information on the history of the title design prior to the emergence of Saul Bass in the mid-50s. Were there any one person or design house primarily responsible for the title cards of the noir era, or did each studio have their own in-house artists? Any other information you can share on these iconic title designs?
That's a really good question and a subject for further study. I know there's a website where somebody like posts all of the title cards from noir films, and the typefaces are pretty extraordinary. There was no, unlike today where you go out to a third party to do your title sequences, they were all done in-house at the various studios. And I really think it was up to the director to determine whether he cared about the title sequence or whether he just left the title sequence to the studio to design it, whatever they felt made sense, and then it would be an executive's decision 9 times out of 10. The person I'm thinking of who did great title sequences, and this kind of goes with the Saul Bass thing, was Otto Preminger, who was doing great title sequences in his films, you know, back with like Fallen Angel has a fantastic title sequence in 1945 with it starts with Dana Andrews on the bus, and so the titles are on like signs, road signs, as he's on the bus coming into town. And then Where the Sidewalk Ends has a great title sequence where it's written in chalk as he walks down the street. Those are clearly Preminger himself taking charge of the title sequences. You really didn't see that until you only saw it in Preminger, and then in the 50s, it really switched to titles over action. You really started to see more of that, where it started to look more like television, frankly. Prior to that, it was all about the typeface and what kind of background you wanted, whether it was that canvas background or some kind of airbrush design thing or some Art Deco thing. But those decisions were made by the studios, and more times than not by the producers rather than the directors of the film. But it's something I'd love to know more about, you know. And until Saul Bass, nobody really got credit for that stuff. In much the same way, like, you know, I've been collecting movie posters for years, but try finding out the names of the artists on American movie posters. I mean, except for a few, like, you know, like William Rose or somebody, they just weren't particularly well known. Or when Norman Rockwell would do a movie poster like The Razor's Edge or something. Anyway, if anybody is listening knows more about this, definitely contact us. I mean,
Yeah.
it would be a really fun story for the Noir City magazine.
Yeah, because we've not done that.
No.
And okay, so evocative dialogue, double entendres, and wordplay seem like and the like seem to be replete in film noir. Did people really talk like that in the 30s or 40s, or were the writers just having fun? So, you know, sort of like the Maltese Falcon and the play on the word pigeon. And also explain how guns still got past the Hollywood production code, and that's
that's interesting. Okay, so I'm assuming that what the pigeon reference has something to do with the Paloma.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, and that the ship that the Falcon arrives on in San Francisco is the Paloma, which is the pigeon, and of course all these pigeons are after the Falcon, which is all Hammett. That's all Hammett, because he was the most well-read and super sophisticated guy. So everything in the Maltese Falcon is completely intended. Did people actually talk like that? Not really. I don't think the average person talked like that, but it was very, very common for writers of the time, and not just in pulp fiction or anything, but in newspapers, on the radio. That was American vernacular speech. That slangy, and to be quite honest about it, it's not that uncommon or not that different from contemporary urban slang. You know, I was startled the other day when I said something on Noir Alley. I'm not even going to repeat this now. I used an old term on Noir Alley that I had no idea had a contemporary connotation that was really filthy, really filthy. And everybody started sending me emails like, how did you get away with that? That was amazing. And I felt just like, you know, this question is saying, how did they get away with saying Gunsel in the Maltese Falcon? It's like, they didn't know. You know, the people at the production code didn't know. Just like I had no idea that this expression that I used on Noir Alley meant something different to people today. Right? And it was like, holy cow, if I probably would have really tried to get away with it if I knew. But and that's the thing. I mean, Hammett knew what a Gunsel was.
Yeah.
But I think he was just having fun and saying, I'm going to use this, and everybody's going to assume it means a gunman when actually it means a kept boy, you know.
Yeah.
It wasn't as that type of speech wasn't as uncommon as people might think back then. And I say that because, you know, my dad was a newspaper writer, and he wrote columns filled with that stuff, filled with it. And he was just he wrote for a daily paper. He wasn't writing specialized crime fiction or anything. He wrote for the daily paper. So it was common usage at one time. I'm so sorry about the thing with my ear. It must be like really warm or something, because this little earpiece just keeps wanting to pop out no matter how far I push it in there.
Yeah, it's humid. It's the humidity. And this is from Kathy. I love this question, and you'll know why. Given that so many noir characters are detectives, what fact would you attribute to The Shadow, as written by Maxwell Grant or Walter B. Gibson, in influencing noir writing and film? Do you have an opinion or information on why no film has been successfully made that adequately portrays this most fascinating character? Who would you have liked to see cast in the role had it been made in the 1940s and 50s?
Oh, okay. Well, I want to hear from you as well, like why this is a good question for you. I mean, yes, I'm a huge fan of The Shadow. I read all those books when I was younger. I mean, I read them when they were reprinted as paperbacks with the great Jim Steranko paintings on the covers of the paperbacks. I love that character. I love everything about it. I don't know how influential that character was on the development of noir. I don't think it was clearly not as influential as, you know, Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe or the James M. Cain books, because it honestly was more like movie serial material than single film stuff. And they never knew how to do it right. And it is one of the great missed opportunities of all time, because The Shadow should have been the great film noir serial.
Yeah.
Like RKO should have made a series of Shadow movies.
Yeah.
And okay, I'm going to ask you, Anne, if you, who would you pick to play the Shadow, aka Lamont Cranston, aka Kent Allard, right? I mean, I love the Shadow because he has two aliases, right?
Yes.
I mean, Lamont Cranston is also a guise that, you know, who would you, because I know exactly who I would cast in the part.
Oh, that's interesting. So I have to say, because I'm a huge fan of the radio series, for me it would be really difficult not to have anybody besides Orson Welles play that part, frankly, because to me, he just is the Shadow because of his voice. So I would definitely want, if it wasn't Welles, someone who has a really terrific speaking voice, because the one thing, I actually liked the Alec Baldwin version because because his voice was so great. In fact, that's when I noticed what a great voice Alec Baldwin had, because I didn't really notice that about him before.
Yeah.
Until then.
I wasn't crazy about that film because I don't think of the Shadow as a superhero.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. He's a crime fighter. You know, he's less of a superhero than Batman, right?
Yeah.
But the guy I would cast in a heartbeat would be Basil Rathbone.
Oh,
I mean, he would be like just every image you ever see of Lamont Cranston, it's Basil Rathbone.
Oh,
And I, you know, wouldn't that have been awesome? Like RKO, like a series, you know, Val Luton could have produced them with Basil Rathbone as the star, and they'd be like 65-minute Shadow adventures. I know what I'm going to be dreaming about tonight.
Yeah, me too.
That was a good question. That was a
really good question. Yeah. And this is from Andrew. How do you think the teen crime juvenile delinquent films of the 1950s and early 60s contributed to or were influenced by the film noir movement? Also, is there a teen crime film that you think is definitely a film noir other than Big Night?
That's interesting. Because that was a definite movement in the 1950s, and its rise sort of coincided with the decline of film noir. And it also fits in, there's another little subset of noir that is tucked in there, which is the home invasion movie, hostage noir and stuff, which for whatever reason in the mid-50s became a real thing because people, with the juvenile delinquency thing, like middle-class Americans started fearing that they weren't safe in their own homes. And so you saw a lot of these movies, you know, The Night Holds Terror and Desperate Hours, and, you know, there's a bunch of them. The one that feels kind of noir to me is Crime in the Streets, the Don Siegel picture with John Cassavetes. That has a real noirish quality to it. And Night Holds Terror, somewhat as well. But that's an interesting question. I know that in the magazine years ago, Jake Hinkson wrote a really good piece about hostage noir or home invasion noir. And it was interesting how much overlap there was between juvenile delinquent movies and home invasion films. And you can see that continued on. Those, you know, noir died out, but that you're not even safe in your own home movies became a whole thing unto themselves, you know?
Yeah, and that theme has also had a big resurgence in horror films in the past decade or so, which is kind of interesting. And the thing I never understand about the old home invasion films, you know, from the noir period is why do there's like three guys in the gang. One of them is always the sex maniac, and they always leave like the sex maniac alone with like the woman of the house. It's like, this guy, maybe somebody else who doesn't have this problem should be doing that job.
Well, that scene, I'm going to answer that like a producer. That scene was always in the movie because that was going to be the poster.
Yeah.
Right? That's how they were going to sell the movie, because they have to have the woman being threatened by the maniac on the poster. That's all there is to it. Did you ever see Door to Door Maniac, with Johnny Cash?
No, I have not.
It's a home invasion movie where Johnny Cash is the killer. I mean, he's the psycho.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, no, I've been meaning to watch it because I'm actually a really big Johnny Cash fan.
And you should be.
Yeah, and I've seen public domain copies of that floating around, but I've never been able to have the courage to watch it. Okay, and this is from Brian. I love film noir movies set on a train. So what are your favorite noir train movies? And could you name, so you mentioned it's like Narrow Margin, Double Indemnity, Strangers on the Train. And could you name some others which I may have missed? If you could also comment why film noir seems so suited to trains apart from them being a major means of transportation at the cost of, during the period.
Oh, well, that's easy.
Brian's from Australia.
Oh, okay.
I throw that in.
Good night, mate. The thing that makes train movies great, whether they're noir or not, is the claustrophobia. Yeah. And the fact that it's moving, so there's relentless forward motion, and yet you are trapped on the train. So, I mean, that's obvious. A few years ago, I wrote a rather extensive essay for the TCM Classic Film Festival about train movies and the whole history of train movies, because, you know, the Great Train Robbery is considered the first narrative film.
Yeah.
And it's a crime film, it's a Western, it's a train movie. I mean, everything's in there, right?
Oh.
Narrow Margin is obviously the best noir train movie. And you have to distinguish these films by, are they set on trains, or is just something happens on a train during the course of the movie, right? I mean, Narrow Margin, most of the movie takes place on a train. It's like Murder on the Orient Express. It mostly takes place on a train. Strangers on a Train just has one, it opens on a train. That's it, right? Double Indemnity, the murder takes place on a train, but it's not a train movie at all, you know? Runaway Train is a train movie, right?
Yeah.
Which is a pretty wild film. Originally was going to be a Kurosawa film. My personal favorite train movie is The Train, the John Frankenheimer movie about the Nazis trying to get the art out of France, and the resistance fighters who want to save the art and concoct a scheme to steal the train and save the art. I love that movie. And I love The General. Buster Keaton's The General is a great train movie. But the noir film, I look like I should just sit here like this the whole time, right? The great noir on a train is The Tall Target.
I was going to mention that. I was waiting to mention that.
There you go. Well, go ahead, Ann. Tell the folks about why The Tall Target is such a cool movie.
Oh, well, it's just so people know, it's actually set, it's actually about Abraham Lincoln, and Dick Powell plays this detective who is sort of convinced that someone's going to try to assassinate him on the train. So he's on the train. And so it's just, and it was, John Alton shot it, right? Is it John Alton?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm not positive. I think it might be George Discount who shot
I think
it.
you're right.
I'm not entirely positive. Anthony Mann directed
it, which is why I was thinking maybe it was John Alton. But it's just really it's so suspenseful because of that claustrophobic, and he's sort of like on his own, and it's just
Yeah, it's a great film. It's a great script.
yeah.
It's a great history lesson. Like, it's a great example of how you take a history and fictionalize it without really altering it in any huge way, because it is based on a true story.
Yeah.
You know, and of course it's weird because Dick Powell plays a New York investigator named John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
Is the real guy's name,
which is
right?
the real guy, yeah.
Who thwarts the assassination attempt of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Right? And like, how weird is it that, you know, the next most famous presidential assassination, right, would be John F. Kennedy. So anyway, I highly recommend that movie. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it really is great. And also when you see the way that it's lit, I mean, it really does look like a film noir.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, just the lighting in it is amazing. It's
I think it's 1949 or 50. I'm not sure, but
yeah.
Excellent film.
Yeah. And let's see. Okay, so this is kind of strange because
good. We like strange.
It's more strange because Jerome from Paris and Isaac, also known as King Pickle, submitted the same question for this month, which is, can you explain why in most film noir movies drivers get in or out of their cars through the passenger's door? I couldn't believe it. 2 different people asked this question.
And I have to tell you, I got this same question several times after on social media because of a Noir Alley screening, where clearly somebody got out on the passenger side. Okay, I'm going to extrapolate an answer here because I don't actually know. I can't tell you definitively what the reason is, but I will say this. My family always had cars with bench seats, and there were instances where you would slide across to get out the passenger side if you were the driver, right? And generally that was when it was a crowded street. And you have to remember, a lot of those old cars had huge doors that you did not want to open out into the street if it was like one lane of traffic. So it was far simpler to just slide over and exit on the sidewalk side than it would be to try to swing that huge door out into oncoming traffic and get out that way. I can also see how a director would say, just slide over and get out, because it's much easier for the crew and it's less time consuming than get out in traffic, close the door, walk around the car, come up on the curb. It's like a lot more business than just slide across and get out and go on your way.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume that they're just super practical reasons that nobody thinks about now, because if you drive a Mini Cooper, you know, it's a small door. You just get out of the car and you go on your way. But you know, these were land yachts that people were driving back then, and opening that door into traffic could really be a hazard. So I'm going to assume that's the reason why. Why all of a sudden this became a you know, we need to know to so many people all of a sudden, I have no idea.
That was more why it was so startling for me. It was, you know, I kind of go through the questions and I'm like, didn't someone just already ask this? Okay. And this one is from Bob. What would you pick as an underrated film? And this is addressed to both of us, so I also get to answer this.
Okay, good.
What would you pick as an underrated film noir? Not just underrated quality-wise, but a movie that hardly anyone talks about, even noir fans. Mine is 1949 Dennis O'Keefe's Christmas noir, Cover Up, which is not only one of my favorite noirs, but one of my favorite films, period. I'm actually a little obsessed with it.
Okay. All right, Bob. I've seen it, but I'm going to go back and watch it again now on Bob's recommendation because it didn't strike me as being awesome. So what's yours? You go first. And do you have one? An underrated noir that you think more people should?
Yeah, I think this is one just people haven't heard of, but I would say Chicago Calling, which is with Dan Duryea. People who know me understand I'm obsessed with him. And his wife said it was her favorite performance of his. And he plays, I think his character is an alcoholic. And his wife goes back to Chicago with her daughter, and then their accident. And he's waiting to get a phone call from the hospital. And they shut off his phone for non-payment. And it's his adventure through Los Angeles trying to get the money to pay his phone bill so he can get this phone call about whether, what's happened to his daughter who's been in this accident. And along the way, he meets and bonds with this young boy. And but it is just like, because you're kind of seeing like the best and worst of humanity. And this character also finally manning up as well. Yeah. It's really touching.
I will second that. I like that film very much. John Reinhardt was the director. We have restored a couple of other John Reinhardt films. I'm happy to say that Chicago Calling doesn't really need to be restored. Yeah. It has been preserved and a very, very worthwhile film. I'm going to say, one is very timely because I just showed it on Noir Alley, this B film called Destination Murder, which is really fun. So I'm just saying that one just because it's way more fun and goofy and entertaining than it has any right to be. And I don't think it's gotten any credit or anything. But that's a B film that's just a goof. The A film that I think is better than it gets credit for, and it isn't included on a lot of lists because Lorraine Day is the star, is The Locket, which I think is a really terrific, complex movie. And I also like it because it's a female protagonist, a truly noir female protagonist, where she's also the quote unquote villain of the piece. And it's like a psychological suspense story with all of these flashbacks. And, Robert Mitchum is in it, early Mitchum before he had his breakout. I think that's a really good film. Should be more well regarded.
Yeah, and also the structure in that's fascinating because there's actually flashbacks within flashbacks. And so you keep getting these sort of different perspectives on the heroine. Well, I kind of think she's a heroine, I guess, in a way.
Well, I mean, you could. I'm just saying that she's
kind of both. I mean, she's protagonist, but she's also like, I guess, because none of the other characters really seem to counter her in the sense of she's such a strong character. You know what I'm saying? Like usually everything.
I know exactly what you're saying. That's what makes the film special. It's like the rare film in which the protagonist is also the antagonist.
Yeah.
It's like In a Lonely Place where Bogart is the protagonist, but he's also the antagonist in the movie,
Yeah.
And I'm always fascinated by films and stories that attempt to do that, and which is really, that's very noir.
Yeah.
And it's really rare when it's a woman in that role. I mean, Leave Her to Heaven is obviously another example of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so those are mine. The Locket and Destination Murder.
Even I think the character in The Locket is more sympathetic than the woman from Leave Her to Heaven.
Oh, there's no question about that. There's no question about that.
And oddly, one of the questions that we got was going to ask you to talk about The Locket. So that worked out. You actually answered two questions.
A twofer. It's good. Good job.
And this is from Aaron St. John. I proposed a question before the first session about the significance of Diego Rivera's Flower Cellar painting appearing repeatedly in noirs, almost simultaneously. You mentioned it on TCM as far as showing resistance to HUAC. But could you take some time to elaborate a little more fully and add context, names, as it were?
Funny, names. Well, for starters, I'm not positive that painting is called the Flower Seller. I think it's called the Flower Gatherer, or something like that, because people would recognize it's a very famous Diego Rivera painting of a peasant with a sack on his back gathering up all these. They look to be lilies or lotuses or something.
Yes.
And there is conjecture, and I've helped inspire it, that the painting was used in films as a signature, showing allegiance to the left in Hollywood, right? People who were fellow travelers or were sympathetic to the people being persecuted by the House Un-American Activities Committee, that they showed this allegiance by placing that painting in the films. Now, it's hard to track this down unless you can find someone of prominence to just come right out and say that's what was happening.
Yeah.
Because what ends up on the walls in these movies, it can be specified by the writer if it's important, like, he stops in front of a painting of this or that, and then they have to get it. The director can choose it. The art director can choose it. Or if none of them choose it, the set decorator gets to decide and put up whatever he or she wants to put up in the shot, right? As an example, in The Prowler, that picture is in Evelyn Keyes' home in The Prowler, right? Now, it's safe to say everybody involved in that movie was on the QAC's hit list, right? Everybody. So it could have been Dalton Trumbo who specified it in the script, or it could have been Joseph Losey who said we're going to put the painting there, or it could have been John Hughley, who was the production designer and art director on the movie, who was blacklisted himself out of Hollywood. So any of them could have been responsible for it. But I bring that up to say, it could have been just a set decorator who did it under the radar on another film. So you can't say this shows that the director had allegiance to, because you don't know.
Yeah.
Right? It's possible. If you know for a fact that the director was a lefty, if it was Jules Dassin or Joseph Losey or somebody like that, then I think it's a safe bet to say the set decorator put it there and he said, leave it there. If it was a film directed by Sam Wood and the painting shows up, I'm going to tell you that it was a sly art director or set decorator who was having a joke at Sam Wood's expense.
Yeah.
Right? Because Sam Wood was a very, very right-wing director, like Leo McCarey and some of these other people. So anyway, so it's very hard to determine this is what it means. But I don't think there's any doubting that the painting had weighted significance at that time.
And I think that's something too that it's always good to remember that film is a collaborative process. There just isn't really even though the auteur theory is very popular, the reality is those things are really done by a group of people, and that's why some directors work with the same cinematographer, or actors like Ford had his John Ford players that were in all his films, and
I couldn't agree more. I think it's something vital for people to recognize, and I think even in my small way as a film writer and historian, this is something that I am constantly trying to promote, to counterbalance a history of film, to counterbalance film history that gives too much credit to directors for everything and diminishes the significance of writers, cinematographers, production designers, I mean, there is so much stuff that people have written about where it's like, well, you know that William Cameron Menzies actually did everything on this film, right? I mean, and no one would know, right? I mean, Gone with the Wind is as much a William Cameron Menzies movie as anybody else, right? And he doesn't really get the credit for it. So anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked here, but your point is well taken, Anne. People need to stop describing films with the director's name. I don't approve of it, and if the director didn't write it, he can't really lay claim to authorship of the film, right? You can say, you know, Robert C. Admack directed this, you know, Phantom Lady. It's, oh my God, it's fantastic. But you can't tell me that Phantom Lady isn't as much Cornell Woolrich, Joan Harrison, Robert C. Admack, Woody Burdell, the cinematographer. They all collaborated to create this incredible film. Film is collaboration. That's it. I'm off the soapbox now.
No, I think it's a good soapbox to have, frankly. So we're at about an hour. No, we are at an hour. And we still have questions to go. Would you be amenable to picking this up next week?
That's your call. I mean, I can keep going, but if you want to break it and we'll add on a special edition, we can do that.
Let's go ahead and do a second edition. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So we can see everybody next week.
And then I'll be able to get this thing fixed so that I don't have to keep poking my brain. That would be good.
Yeah, so let's do that. So we will also see you all again next Thursday, and I'll put up reminders on social media so you guys can, you know, get it there too, but we'll be back again. So any final words?
The questions were great.
Yeah.
The questions are really great. I really appreciate the time people put into thinking of these things, and it's fun because it gets me thinking about stuff. Some of these questions kind of bug me because I have submitted the final manuscript for my book, and it's like, damn, I should have included something about that. You know, that would have been good. Too late now. That thing is in production. So, all right. So very good, Anne. I look forward to talking to you again very, very soon.
Me too, and we'll see you all next week as well.
But I have to say, some people are going to be very disappointed because there were no cat cameos this time.
It's too hot. They're all like scattered somewhere cool. I know. This is the first time we've done this that we have not had a cat on this side.
Well, we'll make sure you get them back for the sequel.
Yes, I will. I will wrangle cats. That's
okay. Very good. Very good. Okay, we'll see you real soon.
Good night.
Good night.